Hey, it's Rob from the Facebook Myocardial Bridge Support Group, and this video is just a short one to dispel a myth. This myth is almost entirely propagated by doctors. It's not a patient myth. I've never heard a patient say this, except when they're repeating what a doctor said. And I don't know where this came from or how this started, but it's it's almost like a linguistic myth. It's a misstatement of saying it the wrong way. That an artery can have an intramyocardial course, but not be bridging. Okay, you have several doctors out there, including some doctors publicly, who have said on podcasts and things like that, that arteries can have an intramyocardial course, but not be bridging, with the implication that, but they don't need surgery because, they're just sitting there, intramyocardial course, but not bridging. And the myth in there is that bridging is somehow different from an intramyocardial course. Whereas bridging, meaning having a myocardial bridge, is the definition of an intramyocardial course. An intramyocardial course is the definition of bridging. They're synonymous. It's the same thing. So it's almost like saying, it's exactly like saying actually, that a patient has a temperature of 103 degrees, but they don't have a fever. So there's nothing to worry about. It's like, what? That is a fever. That's what a fever is. So that's the myth. I don't know why would you think that bridging wasn't, it seems like the fallacy, what they're trying to say, I can only assume, is that some myocardial bridges don't need surgery because they're not compressing or something like that. That seems to be what they're trying to say. But the fact is that bridging is not an action that involves movement. That's the misconception in there. It's not a movement. This is not bridging. That's compressing. It's two different things. Think it's common sense. Just look at a bridge that goes over a river. Does that bridge have to compress the river? Does it squeeze the river? Does it cut off flow from the river? No, it's just going over something. That's it. All it is, going over, bridging. So as long as there's any piece of muscle whatsoever, even if it's like paper thin band of muscle, if it's like 0.1 millimeters of film of muscle from the heart going over the artery, or if it's 3 centimeters deep, the opposite, doesn't matter. That's bridging. Why? Because it's literally going over that artery. That's it. It's not that complicated. So this has been tossed around. We've had doctors saying, I've come across lots of arteries that have been in the heart during surgery, but they weren't bridging, right? And some doctors have even said they left them there in the heart, didn't bother to unroof them. Or other doctors, other times they've said, I dug them out, I pulled them out of the heart. They did unroof them, but they said they weren't bridging. That has no meaning. It's a contradiction in terms, because once you said that they have an intramyocardial course, that artery was stuck in the heart, that is bridging. It was obviously bridging. So, like I said, I guess they're talking about compression, and even that's a myth too. There's a secondary myth that somehow during surgery, you can see an artery with an intramyocardial course, a myocardial bridge. You can see the bridging, meaning inside the heart, stuck in there. And that you could know, just by looking at it, whether it's causing symptoms and what the compression is and whether it has any relevance or whether it needs to be unroofed. You have absolutely no idea. How would you know that? Right? Because even when arteries are scanned and tested and all that with caths and CTs, it's still hard to know what the symptoms will be with the patient. It's very tricky. Stanford has been trying for years to find some stat or something that will tell you exactly what the symptoms of a patient are, from that, or whether it needs surgery. They've come up with nothing. There is no single stat. The cath results, IFR, RFR, DFR, that's not a reliable gauge of whether a patient needs surgery. A lot of doctors think that because it might be true for other types of conditions, but it's not true for bridges. And that's a fact. It's been proven that there's not a good correlation between symptoms and caths. In fact, there's people who have high cath levels, high cath scores like 0.92 RFR, and have still had surgery. So I'll make another video about that myth. But overall, you can't know just by looking at an artery in surgery you just found it with an intramyocardial course. There's no way to say whatsoever whether that artery is causing symptoms or not, because you never tested it, and you never you just have no idea. Even if you did test it, you still might not know, because the patient can have symptoms from bridges that seemingly have acceptable test scores, which would indicate they're benign, but they're actually not. Okay, it's a very tricky business, figuring out myocardial bridges. So that's the general idea. Intramyocardial course and myocardial bridging are synonymous. They're the same thing. There's no difference. It's 6.5 dozen, same thing. And I speak from experience, because I had a first cath in New York where the cath doctor wrote on my report just exactly that my artery had an intramyocardial course but did not appear to be bridging. And when the doctor says that, they're essentially telling you that they've done very little research on bridges, which is most doctors. Why would they, right? It's not something that comes up for them. They're not taught about it very well. But because anyone who's dealt with bridges for a long time, they know that the definition of a bridge, right? Even if you just look on our Wikipedia page, or any, like Stanford's page or something, and you look at how they define bridge, it's actually defined that way. It's defined as a myocardial bridge is when a coronary artery takes an intramyocardial course, when it goes into the heart. So the contradiction that an intramyocardial course is somehow cannot be bridging defies even the definition written on the first line of most of the websites about myocardial bridges. So I hope that's helpful.